A woman named Monica sent us this story, and I'm still thinking about it days later. For her entire life, Monica's mother called her a paper soldier, not as a joke, as a weapon. Every family gathering, every dinner party, every chance she got. She just pushes papers, her mother would tell people. Not a real soldier, not like the heroes in our family. Monica worked in military intelligence, classified operations, threat assessments that saved lives no one ever heard about. But to her mother, she was an embarrassment, a daughter who refused to be the trophy she wanted. Then came the night of the military gala. Monica walked into a room full of generals, politicians, and power brokers with her mother right beside her, already working the crowd, already looking for important people to impress. And in front of a group of distinguished guests, her mother did what she always did. She pointed at Monica and laughed. "This is my daughter, a paper soldier. She sits at a desk." But people chuckled politely. Some looked away. Monica said nothing. But she wasn't listening to her mother anymore. She was watching a man standing next to her. A man whose face she recognized from a classified file years ago. A man who had no business being at this gala. And she was watching a server carrying wine toward a 4-star general. Something was wrong. Monica could feel it. When the general rose to make a toast, the room fell silent. Everyone watched him reach for his glass. Everyone except Monica. She stepped forward, leaned close, and whispered 3 words in French. "Ne buvez pas. Don't drink." The general froze. He looked at her. 1 second, 2 seconds. Then he set the glass down and said one word, "Oracle." 5 minutes later, military police flooded the room. And Monica's mother, the woman who spent 30 years calling her daughter worthless, stood there watching as the most powerful man in the room bowed his head to the paper soldier she had always despised. But here's what Monica didn't know yet. The betrayal that night went deeper than she ever imagined. And the person who had put her and that general in danger was closer than she thought. My name is Monica Roberts. I'm 33 years old, and I've spent the last 11 years working in military intelligence, analyzing threats, assessing risks, and preventing disasters that never made the news, because I stopped them before they happened. To most people, my career is invisible. To my mother, it was always something to be ashamed of. I grew up in a military family where everything revolved around sacrifice you could see. Medals on chests, flags at funerals, stories told at dinner tables about men who ran toward danger while others ran away. My father was one of those men, a respected army officer, who died in service when I was 9 years old. I barely remember his face now, but I remember what his death did to my mother. It gave her an identity she's been wearing ever since. She never served a day in uniform, but she built her entire life around being a military widow. The charity galas, the memorial committees, the carefully cultivated friendships with generals' wives and senators' aides. She collected sympathy, the way some people collect art, displaying it, positioning it, making sure everyone knew exactly how much she had sacrificed. And somewhere in all of that, I became a problem she couldn't solve. I wasn't the daughter she wanted. I didn't marry a rising officer. I didn't give her grandchildren to show off at holiday parties. I joined the army myself, but not in the way she could brag about. I sat at a desk. I read reports. I analyzed patterns that most people wouldn't understand, even if I explained them. That's when she started calling me a paper soldier. The first time she said it, I was 24, home for Thanksgiving, surrounded by extended family, and my uncle asked what I did in the army. Before I could answer, my mother laughed and said, "Oh, Monica pushes papers. She's our little paper soldier." Everyone chuckled. I smiled because I didn't know what else to do. She said it again at Christmas, then at my cousin's wedding, then at every gathering where someone might have been impressed by me. Always with that same half laugh, that same dismissive wave of her hand. It wasn't cruel in a way you could confront. It was just enough contempt, wrapped in just enough humor, that fighting back would make me look petty. So I stopped fighting. I stopped sharing what I actually did. I stopped hoping she might one day understand that the reason nothing bad happens sometimes was because people like me made sure it didn't. I built a career analyzing allied intelligence, identifying vulnerabilities, writing threat assessments that went straight to decision makers who could act on them. I was good at my job, quietly, invisibly good. The kind of good that doesn't get medals because the whole point is that nothing happens. But to my mother, I was always less than. Always the daughter who chose the easy path, always the paper soldier. 3 months before the gala, I learned the truth. I ran into a former colleague at a conference, someone who had worked in personnel years ago. We got to talking, and she mentioned something that stopped me cold. She told me that years ago, I had been recommended for a prestigious NATO liaison position. A career-defining opportunity. The kind of role that would have changed everything. I never heard about it. The opportunity simply vanished. She said someone had called HR, expressing concerns about my suitability. Family circumstances, they claimed, personal instability, nothing specific enough to document, but enough to make people hesitate. I didn't ask who made the call. I already knew. My mother had relationships everywhere in military social circles. Not through rank, she had none, but through decades of charity work, memorial committees, and strategic friendships with the right people. She didn't give orders. She whispered. She expressed concern. She planted small doubts that grew into walls I never knew existed. She hadn't just dismissed my career. She had actively sabotaged it. I spent 3 months sitting with that knowledge. I didn't confront her. What would be the point? She would deny it. She would twist it. She would make me the villain for even suggesting such a thing. I had spent my whole life watching her control narratives. I wasn't going to give her another one. Then the invitation arrived. A military gala, one of the most prestigious events of the year. Generals, defense officials, political figures, major donors. The kind of room where careers are made and destroyed in a single conversation. The invitation came directly to me. Not through my mother, not as someone's +1. It had my name on it. My mother found out, of course, she always did, and within hours she was already planning what she would wear, who she would talk to, how she would work the room. She assumed she was going. She assumed it was her opportunity, not mine. I let her believe that. I even agreed to bring her. But something had shifted inside me. For the first time in my life, I wasn't going to fade into the background while she took center stage. I wasn't going to smile politely while she introduced me as the family disappointment. I didn't know exactly what would happen that night, but I knew I was done hiding. I didn't go to that gala to prove anything. I went because I was done being edited out of my own story. The ballroom took my breath away, and I hated myself for it. Crystal chandeliers hung from ceilings that seemed impossibly high. Military dress uniforms stood crisp and decorated beside evening gowns that cost more than my annual salary. A string quartet played something classical in the corner, soft enough to allow conversation, but present enough to remind everyone that this was an occasion of importance. Everything about the room was designed to project dignity, tradition, and controlled elegance. I felt out of place immediately. My dress was appropriate but not expensive. My jewelry was minimal. I didn't know how to hold a champagne flute the way these women did, like it was an extension of their perfectly manicured hands. But I had spent 11 years learning to observe rooms full of people who didn't know they were being watched. So that's what I did. I noticed the quick glances exchanged between certain guests, looks that carried meaning beyond polite acknowledgement. I saw handshakes that lasted a beat too long, accompanied by slight nods that seemed to confirm something unspoken. I watched smiles that didn't reach the eyes, laughter that served as punctuation rather than genuine response. This wasn't just a celebration. It was a marketplace of influence, and the currency being exchanged was invisible to anyone who didn't know how to look. My mother, of course, was in her element. She moved through the crowd like she had been born for this, introducing herself to anyone who looked important, dropping names of generals she had met at charity functions, senators whose wives she knew from memorial committees. She positioned herself near powerful figures with the precision of a chess player, always one move ahead, always angling for advantage. I watched her work the room with a strange detachment. This was the same strategy she had used on me for 30 years. The subtle positioning, the careful cultivation of relationships, the way she made herself indispensable to people who had power she wanted to borrow. I used to think she did it unconsciously. Now I knew better. I was standing near the edge of the room when she spotted me and waved me over. She was speaking with a small group of guests. 2 women in designer dresses, a man in a navy dress uniform, and another man I didn't recognize. He was distinguished looking, perhaps in his late 50s with silver hair, and the kind of confident posture that suggested he was used to being the most important person in any conversation. I approached, because refusing would have caused a scene. My mother smiled at me, that particular smile she reserved for public performance, and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "This is my daughter, Monica. She works a desk job in the military. A paper soldier, as I like to say." Polite laughter rippled through the group. One of the women looked away, uncomfortable. The Navy officer gave me a sympathetic glance. But the distinguished man with silver hair didn't laugh. He smiled, but his eyes stayed fixed on me, with an expression I couldn't quite read. Interest, perhaps, or something else. I didn't react. I didn't defend myself. I had heard this script too many times to be wounded by it anymore. But something shifted in that moment. I was no longer the embarrassed daughter trying to survive another public humiliation. I was an intelligence analyst in a room full of patterns, and something about this man was wrong. I knew his face, not from the gala, not from my mother's social circles. From a classified file I had worked on 4 years ago. His photograph had appeared in connection with a network suspected of trafficking military intelligence to foreign actors. The case had been closed due to insufficient evidence. The file had been archived, but I never forgot a face. It was one of the few gifts my career had given me. I watched him more closely now, careful not to let my observation show. He glanced toward the VIP table at the front of the room, where a 4-star general was seated with his wife and several senior officials. He checked his watch. There was tension in his posture that didn't match the casual elegance he was projecting. He wasn't here to socialize. He was here for something specific. My training kicked in before my conscious mind caught up. This wasn't paranoia. This was pattern recognition. And the pattern was wrong. I scanned the room again, this time looking for anything that didn't fit. That's when I noticed the server. He was carrying a tray of wine toward the VIP table, moving with purpose through the crowd. His uniform was correct, but his badge was slightly different from the others. Wrong format, wrong color code, small details that most people would never notice. But I had spent years learning that small details were where the truth hid. I looked at the wine bottles on his tray. The label was from an importer. I recognized a company that had appeared in my old files as a suspected front operation for moving money and materials across borders. The investigation had stalled. The company had been officially cleared. But I remembered the name. I remembered everything. The pieces began falling into place with sickening clarity. The man from my mother's circle, connected to an old intelligence file. The server with the wrong badge. The wine from a company that should have raised red flags. All of it converging on the table where a 4-star general sat, unaware that he might be in danger. I didn't know for certain what was happening. I couldn't prove anything, but I knew enough to be afraid. And then another realization hit me colder than the first. The man standing next to my mother hadn't met her by accident. He had likely approached her years ago, deliberately, strategically. Not because of her social status, because she had a daughter who worked in military intelligence, a daughter who might be useful, a daughter whose career movements and frustrations a careless mother might mention over drinks at a charity event. My mother had spent her whole life chasing powerful people. She never learned to tell the difference between power and danger. I stood frozen in that ballroom, watching my mother laugh with a man who might be planning to kill someone tonight, and I realized that everything I had been trained to do had led me to this moment. People think intelligence work is glamorous. They imagine spy movies and secret meetings in foreign capitals. The truth is far quieter and infinitely more tedious. I spent my career in windowless rooms, reading reports that would put most people to sleep, looking for patterns that didn't want to be found. My job was to see what others missed, to identify threats before they became disasters, to stop catastrophes before they started. The nature of my success meant invisibility. When I did my job well, nothing happened. No news stories, no medals, no recognition. The attacks that never occurred didn't make headlines because there was nothing to report. The files were classified. My name redacted, my contributions erased from official records. I was a ghost in the machine, and ghosts don't get promotions. 5 years ago, I wrote a threat assessment that changed everything, though no one ever knew it. I had identified a planned attack on a senior military official. The method was elegant and terrifying poison disguised as a gift, delivered through a compromised catering service at a diplomatic function. The target was a 4-star general who had made powerful enemies through his work on Allied intelligence sharing. If the attack had succeeded, it would have looked like natural causes, a heart attack, a tragic loss, nothing to investigate. I spent 3 weeks piecing together fragments of intercepted communications, financial transfers, and personnel movements. I wrote the report in French because it was intended for NATO partners who needed to coordinate the response. The document was filed under a code name I chose, myself, Oracle Brief. The attack was prevented. The general survived. He never knew who had saved him, and I never expected him to find out. That was the job. That was always the job. I moved through the crowd now, trying to get closer to the VIP table without drawing attention. I needed to warn him. I needed to tell someone what I was seeing. But I had no proof, only instinct and pattern recognition, and in a room full of powerful people, the word of a paper soldier wouldn't count for much. I was 10 feet from his table when he looked up and saw me. Our eyes met. I expected confusion, maybe irritation at being approached by someone he didn't know. Instead, I saw recognition. He stood and walked toward me, his security detail shifting slightly, but not intervening. When he reached me, he spoke quietly enough that no one else could hear. "I know you," he said. "Not your face, but I know your work." I felt the floor tilt beneath me. "Oracle Brief 2019, he continued. "Did you think I wouldn't find out who wrote the report that saved my life?" I couldn't speak. I had spent 5 years believing that report had disappeared into the classified void, like everything else I had ever done. I never imagined anyone would trace it back to me. "It took me 2 years to find your name," he said. "Your superiors didn't want to tell me. They said the analysts preferred to remain anonymous. But I'm persistent when someone saves my life." He had known. For years he had known. "I've been watching your career from a distance," he continued. "Or rather, watching it stall. You should be running a division by now. Instead, you're buried in mid-level analysis work with no path forward. I recommended you for 2 different positions. Both times something happened. Resistance from somewhere outside the official chain. Whispers about your suitability. Nothing I could trace." He paused, and his eyes moved past me, to where my mother stood, across the room, still holding court with her circle of admirers. "I never knew who was blocking you," he said, "until I saw you walk in tonight with her." The words hit me like a physical blow. He had tried to help me. He had seen my potential and tried to lift me out of obscurity. And my mother, my own mother, had been the invisible hand, pushing me back down every time. "She's been sabotaging you," he said. It wasn't a question. Social connections, quiet words in the right ears, nothing official, nothing traceable. Just enough doubt to make people hesitate. I nodded, not trusting my voice. His expression shifted from sympathy to something sharper. Tell me what you see tonight. I took a breath and spoke quickly. The server with the badge that didn't match. The wine from a company I had flagged years ago in a case that was closed too quickly. The man standing with my mother, the one whose face I recognized from old files, the way he kept glancing toward this table, the tension in his posture that didn't fit the occasion. I can't prove anything, I admitted. But the pattern is wrong. Something is happening. The general nodded slowly. He didn't panic. He didn't dismiss me. He had survived worse than this, and he trusted the instincts of the woman who had saved him once before. I'm going to make a toast in 5 minutes, he said. The wine will be poured. If you're right, stop me. I stared at him. How? Use the old language, he said. The language you wrote the oracle brief in. If I hear French from you, I'll know it's real. French. Our code. A signal that only the two of us would understand. He returned to his table, leaving me standing alone with 5 minutes to decide. 5 minutes to act on instinct without proof. 5 minutes to step out of the shadows in front of everyone, including the mother who had spent 30 years trying to keep me invisible. He didn't ask me to save him. He asked me to finish what I started 5 years ago. The next 5 minutes felt like hours. I watched the general return to his seat at the VIP table. His movements calm and unhurried, betraying nothing of what we had just discussed. The string quartet continued playing. Conversations flowed around me like water around a stone. No one in this room had any idea what was about to happen, except me. I positioned myself where I could see everything: the general, the server with the wrong badge, the man standing with my mother, across the room. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, but my mind was strangely clear. I had spent my entire career making decisions with incomplete information, analyzing fragments, trusting patterns when proof was impossible. This was no different, except this time everyone would see. The general rose to speak, and the room fell silent. All eyes turned to him, the most powerful person present, a man whose career had shaped military policy for 2 decades. He was about to raise his glass and offer a toast, and every person in that ballroom wanted to be part of the moment. My mother was practically glowing. She had positioned herself as close to the VIP area as she could manage without being escorted away, basking in proximity to power the way she always did. She believed she belonged there. She believed that standing near important people made her important too. The server moved closer, carrying his tray of wine. I watched him approach the general's table. I watched the general's hand reach for the glass that had been placed in front of him. I watched my mother smile at someone nearby, oblivious to everything, except her own reflection, in other people's admiration. And then I moved. I didn't shout. I didn't run. I didn't grab the general's arm or knock the glass from his hand. I simply walked forward, calm and steady, until I was standing beside him. He looked up at me, his hand still extended toward the wine. I leaned close and said 3 words barely above a whisper. Ne buvez pas. Don't drink. The general's hand stopped. His eyes met mine. 1 second. 2 seconds. The room continued around us, unaware that everything had just changed. Then he set the glass down, without a word. To anyone watching, it looked like nothing. A brief exchange, a moment of hesitation before a toast. But the general and I both knew what had just happened. 5 years of silence, 5 years of being invisible. And now 3 words in a language only he would understand had confirmed everything. He turned to me and spoke quietly, but clearly enough for those nearby to hear. Oracle. It wasn't a question. It was recognition. It was gratitude. It was the end of my invisibility. Then he made a subtle gesture, with his left hand so small that most people wouldn't have noticed. But his security detail noticed. Within seconds, they were moving. The server with the wrong badge was intercepted before he reached the door. Two men in dark suits appeared beside him, their hands firm on his arms, their faces expressionless. He didn't struggle. He knew it was over. Across the room, the man from my mother's circle. The one whose face I had recognized from old files turned toward the exit. He made it 3 steps before finding his path blocked by another security officer. The color drained from his face. My mother watched all of this with growing confusion. She didn't understand what was happening. She only knew that suddenly the room's attention had shifted away from the toast, away from the general, and towards something she couldn't comprehend. And somehow her daughter was at the center of it. After security had the situation contained, the general walked directly to me. My mother was standing just a few feet away, close enough to hear every word. He took my hand, not a handshake, but something more formal, more respectful, and spoke clearly. "Thank you, again. The first time you were a name in a classified file. Tonight you're standing right here, and I owe you twice." Then he did something I had never seen a 4-star general do for anyone. He bowed his head, just slightly, just enough. A gesture of respect that men of his rank almost never offer. I heard my mother inhale sharply. I didn't look at her. I didn't need to. I could feel her staring at me, trying to reconcile what she was seeing with 30 years of calling me a paper soldier. The label hung in the air between us, unspoken, but present. And suddenly, it meant something entirely different. There was no panic in the room, no screaming, no dramatic confrontation. The general's security team handled everything with quiet efficiency. Within 15 minutes, military police had secured the server and the man connected to my mother. The wine was taken for testing. Guests were told there was a minor security protocol being followed. Nothing to worry about. Please continue enjoying your evening. I stood still watching the controlled chaos I had triggered with 3 words. My mother approached me, her face pale, her composure cracking for the first time I could remember. "What did you do?" she demanded. "What's happening? I know that man. He's a friend. He's a security officer," stepped between us, cutting her off mid-sentence. "Ma'am," he said, his voice flat and professional. "We're aware of your connection to him. That's the problem." I watched my mother's face go white. I watched her mouth open and close without sound. I watched her look around the room for someone to appeal to, someone to validate her, someone to restore the social order she had spent her life climbing. There was no one. For the first time in my life, I watched my mother rendered completely powerless. Not by confrontation, not by argument, but by something far worse, irrelevance. The room didn't applaud, it didn't need to. Power had shifted and everyone felt it. The investigation moved quickly after that night. The wine tested positive for a slow-acting toxin, a sophisticated compound designed to cause cardiac arrest 48 to 72 hours after ingestion. If the general had drunk it, he would have collapsed at home days later. The autopsy would have shown heart failure. Natural causes, no connection to the gala, no investigation, no justice. The server confessed within hours. He was a small piece of a larger network. People who had been dormant for years, waiting for the right opportunity, believing they had been forgotten. They thought the old cases were closed. They thought the files had been buried. They thought no one remembered. But I remembered. The files my mother had mocked as paper pushing contained all the pieces. I just needed to see them assembled in one room. What came next was harder to process than the assassination attempt itself. The investigation revealed something I had suspected, but never confirmed. The man from my mother's circle, the one she had been so desperate to impress, had approached her deliberately years ago, not because of her social connections, not because of her charity work or her status as a military widow, because she had a daughter in military intelligence. He had cultivated the relationship slowly, patiently, the way professionals do. Invitations to exclusive events, small gifts, flattery that made her feel important. In return, my mother had talked freely about me, my work schedule, my frustrations, my assignments. She complained about her disappointing daughter, who sat at a desk instead of doing something worth bragging about. Nothing classified directly, but enough for someone skilled to build a picture. enough to understand my patterns, enough to know what I was working on and when I might be distracted. My mother wasn't a spy. She was something worse. She was an unwitting asset who had betrayed her own daughter while believing she was simply making important friends. 6 weeks after the gala, she received an official summons. Not as a suspect, the legal case against her was weak, but as a witness. The distinction was thin enough to terrify her. She was questioned for hours about her relationship with the man, the gifts she had received, the conversations she had shared. I wasn't present for the interrogation, but I heard about it later, she cried. She insisted she didn't know. She claimed she was a victim too. Maybe she was. Maybe she wasn't. I had stopped trying to decide. She wasn't arrested. There were no charges filed. But in military circles, the truth doesn't need to be official to destroy you. Word spread quietly. Monica Roberts' mother had been associated with a threat against a 4-star general. No one needed to know the details. The whispers were enough. The invitations stopped coming. The charity committees found new chairwomen. The officers' wives who once sought her company now looked past her at events, their smiles frozen, their conversations suddenly elsewhere. The memorial committees she had chaired for decades quietly replaced her name on the letterhead. The status she had spent a lifetime building evaporated in weeks. Not through scandal, not through public accusation, through something far more devastating. Silence. She called me 8 weeks after the gala. Her voice was shaking in a way I had never heard before. "Did you know this would happen?" she demanded. "Did you let me walk into that room knowing what would—" I interrupted her calmly. "I didn't let you do anything. You chose the people you wanted to be close to. I just did my job. The job you spent 30 years calling paper pushing." Silence on the line. I could hear her breathing. "You wanted me to be something you could show off," I continued. "A visible hero, a decorated soldier, something that reflected well on you. When I wasn't that, you tried to keep me small. You sabotaged my career because you couldn't control it. You called HR and told them I wasn't suitable for promotion. You poisoned the well every time someone tried to help me rise." She started to protest, but I wasn't finished. "The irony is, Mum, if you had just let me do my work, if you had just been proud of who I actually am, none of this would have touched you. But you spent so many years chasing people who looked powerful that you couldn't recognize the danger standing right next to you. You were so busy being ashamed of your paper soldier daughter that you never noticed she was the only one who could have protected you." I hung up before she could respond. No tears, no shouting, no closure. Because some wounds don't close. They just stop bleeding. 2 months after the gala, I received an official offer. A senior advisory position in strategic intelligence, reporting directly to a joint command. The kind of role that shaped policy, influenced decisions, and prevented disasters before they made headlines. The recommendation came from the general himself. There was no public ceremony, no media coverage. My name would never appear in any press release. The work I would do would remain classified. My contributions redacted, my impact invisible to everyone except the people who needed to know. But for the first time in my career, I wasn't invisible by circumstance. I was invisible by choice. I understood now what I hadn't understood for 33 years. Real power doesn't need to be seen. It doesn't need applause or recognition or a mother's approval. Real power is knowing what you're capable of and choosing when to use it. I accepted the position. I moved forward. I built a life that had nothing to do with proving anything to anyone. And somewhere in a house that no longer received invitations, my mother sat alone wondering how her paper soldier daughter became someone she never saw coming. Some soldiers fire weapons. Others decide when history stays quiet. My mother wanted me to be seen. I chose to be necessary. That was Monica's story. A woman who spent 33 years being dismissed, diminished, and deliberately sabotaged by the one person who should have championed her, her own mother. A woman who was called a paper soldier so many times that most people would have started to believe it. A woman who chose to be invisible in a world that only rewards those who demand to be seen. And yet when the moment came, when everything converged in that ballroom, when a 4-star general's life hung in the balance, it wasn't the decorated heroes or the powerful politicians who saved him. It was the paper soldier, the daughter no one believed in, the analyst who remembered what everyone else had forgotten. There's something deeply satisfying about watching Monica's mother face the consequences of her choices. For decades, she built her identity on borrowed power, clinging to the coattails of generals and senators, treating her own daughter as an embarrassment rather than an asset. She sabotaged Monica's career, not because she doubted her abilities, but because she feared them. She needed Monica to stay small so she could remain the center of attention. In the end, the social empire she spent a lifetime constructing crumbled in weeks. Not through scandal or public humiliation, but through something far more fitting: silence. The same weapon she had used against Monica for 30 years was turned against her. The whispers, the exclusion, the slow erasure from rooms she once dominated. And Monica. She rose, quietly, invisibly, on her own terms. She didn't need her mother's approval. She didn't need public recognition. She didn't need anyone to validate what she already knew about herself. That's the kind of victory that lasts. But here's what I keep thinking about days after Monica sent us this story. Her mother wasn't evil. She wasn't a villain in the traditional sense. She was a woman trapped by her own insecurities, so desperate for status and recognition that she couldn't see the extraordinary daughter standing right in front of her. She was so busy chasing people who looked powerful that she failed to recognize real power when it lived in her own home. And that's the tragedy beneath the triumph. How many of us have done something similar? Maybe not as extreme, but in smaller ways. How many times have we dismissed someone because their success didn't look the way we expected? How many times have we tried to keep someone small because their growth threatened our sense of self? How many times have we chased impressive strangers while ignoring the quiet strength of the people closest to us? Monica's mother will spend the rest of her life haunted by a single question. What if I had just believed in her? What if instead of calling her a paper soldier, she had asked about her work? What if instead of sabotaging her promotions, she had celebrated her dedication? What if instead of being embarrassed by her daughter's invisible career, she had trusted that invisibility sometimes means importance? She would still have her status. She would still have her invitations and her committees and her carefully cultivated friendships. And she would have something far more valuable: a daughter who wanted to share her victories with her instead of a daughter who had to win despite her. That's the lesson Monica wanted us to share. The people in your life who don't shine the way you expect them to, the ones who work quietly, who don't seek praise, who measure success differently than the world tells them to, they might be the most powerful people you know. And if you spend your life trying to diminish them, you might wake up one day to discover they've outgrown you entirely. Don't wait until it's too late to see the people who matter. Monica is thriving now. She's doing work that will never make headlines, protecting people who will never know her name, and she has never been more at peace. She wanted me to tell you that she doesn't hate her mother. She just stopped needing her. Sometimes that's the most powerful thing you can do. If this story moved you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Have you ever been underestimated by someone who should have believed in you? Have you ever had to prove your worth to people who refused to see it? Or maybe you've been on the other side. Maybe this story made you think about someone in your life whose quiet strength you might have overlooked. Drop a comment below. Tell me what part of Monica's story resonated with you most. And if you haven't already, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss stories like this one. We share real stories from real people every week, stories about resilience, redemption, and the quiet power of those who refuse to be defined by other people's limitations. Thank you for watching. Thank you for listening. And remember, some soldiers fire weapons, but others decide when history stays quiet. Never underestimate the paper soldiers in your life. They might just be the ones who save you.